I'm developing a new theory of Halloween, and I realize most people who are listening to this, unless they're watching it live, they will have already experienced Halloween because Halloween this year is on a Thursday. This comes out. Is it 7 or 7:30 a.m. Amsterdam time?
7:30 a.m. Amsterdam time.
7:30 a.m. Amsterdam time is when this comes out, November 1st. So that's fine. You can have this be a retrospective, but there is a category of events, things, entities that when it is adapted and taken in by a new user of that thing, you come to appreciate and understand the thing more than those who have been doing it for many years. And in this instance, that's Halloween. So we went to this past weekend, we went down to a town, Wassenaar, I think is how you say it, by The Hague, or Den Haag, as they say around here. And they were having Halloween in the neighborhood. And now, don't get me wrong, not everyone in the neighborhood was doing Halloween. But if you would go to the houses that were hosting Halloween, they were like doing the fuck out of it, right? And so like Halloween is not a big deal in the Netherlands yet. I think maybe this is analyst prediction season. So I'm going to do a prediction in the style of an analyst. By 2026, over 45% of Netherlands households will give out Halloween candy and celebrate the event.
That's a very bold prognostication there.
I mean, I think the CAGR that I've experienced on households in major cities is pretty high, double digits. It's
Coach, some would say it's the early innings of Halloween in Amsterdam.
Yeah. No. Now that said, I think this is a marathon that the longer you run it, the faster you go.
Are you 3 steps into
flywheel action?
Yeah, are you 3 steps into a marathon? You know, that
kind
of thing. I like it.
I'm pretty sure that like maybe this is inning 2 of however many innings there are, but
in a marathon.
Yeah, the innings in the marathon, they get shorter and shorter as you go, so it speeds up. Anyhow, so for example, lots of people, I don't know who planned this out in the supply chain. Maybe blockchain was involved. I'm not sure, but many people had that kind of spiderweb stuff. You know, you get these spiderweb packs. And I feel like at least between the three of us, many of our listeners, we're experienced enough to know that you don't fuck with that. It's just going to be it's going to be like a major disappointment. You get this tiny pack that's like smaller than a loaf of bread.
You're slowly peeling it apart, and you're trying to spread it for maximum area, and you end up with 4 feet across on one bush has spider webs. And
exactly. You get this packet of fake spider web, and you're thinking it's going to look like that scene in Indiana Jones in the beginning with like tarantulas. And what it ends up looking is like you just threw a wet towel on a bush.
Yeah.
Right? And it's no good.
It's good for the close-up though.
Yeah. And then as if to add insult to injury, you then have to remove it, which is more difficult than it should be. So anyways, lots of people had that. I celebrate their naivete when it comes to the spider web, but it looked great, right? Now, I think almost to give a little bit of commentary here, I actually have more hope for the Dutch because I think they like do the fuck out of stuff. Like if they got this packet of like this smaller than a loaf of bread spider web, they would probably be like, let's have a few more Heineken and figure this out. And they would kind of like engineer it out so it would work well. Anyhow,
nice. The
best place that we went was someone had actually set up their, as you would say here, their garden, their front yardlet. And they had, I'll send a picture to you, Brandon, so maybe you can put it as some show art here. But they had at least 4 spooky dolls set up in what I'm going to call a haunted doll manger. And they were like reading tarot cards and looking very creepy. Like they had put a lot of effort into this. And they also had, apparently, maybe y'all have, I don't know what they have in Australia, but maybe back in the States, you can buy some sort of projector you can put on your window that has like ghosts running around.
Nice.
Yeah. So they had one of those. And like, I think they were doing pretty good down there in Wassenaar. So, and I bring this up because, people go all out for Halloween, not as much as they go all out for Christmas. But I think maybe in a year or two, we might want to send some delegations from the States to kind of see what kind of innovation we have in the Halloween sort of decorations here. Because they're really coming up with some new stuff.
Some sort of like cultural ambassadorship thing.
Exactly. It's sort of like, you know, we in the same way that, as our friend John Willis would remind us, the American auto manufacturers would go to Japan and be like, what the fuck are they doing here? Right. And so, like, you know, we and some other people, like, we kind of mastered this car manufacturing. It got sent elsewhere, and now we can learn from them about how things are going on.
Well, Australia is a few steps behind the Netherlands, I guess. but I must say, I have noticed an increase in participation year over year. So you know, the pie is growing in this country. I'd still say it's probably like 1 in 20 houses, where before it was like 1 in 40. So it's progress.
Yeah, that's not so bad.
Definitely a lot of the store-bought decorations. You see a couple houses where they clearly just went to the aisle at the grocery store, bought 4 things, and slapped them on their fence. But it's appreciated.
Right? Now, I do want to bring up. I overheard a very enthusiastic, you know, doing a great job, like Dutch guy. 2 of them actually, and they had some trick-or-treaters coming to their door. And they were commenting. It was maybe the most delightful Northern European plain talking straightforwardness thing. And trick-or-treaters would come up and they would say, like, and they said this in a very nice way. Like, I bought 500 pieces of candy and they're all gone. Right. Like, and so, like, I think there is a little bit of education that needs to come in of like, no. You're doing Halloween wrong if you don't have 15% or more of what you bought left over the next day, right? Like, you have to overbuy the candy. There is no running out. That is unacceptable.
And Australia is still in the loose candy stage, which I think went out of fashion in the US in the 70s.
Oh, wow. Everyone would be arrested. You'd be arrested if you did that. And
exactly.
That does match my understanding. Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say this. Like, I'm glad to see everyone's around the world's, like, you know, picking up Halloween, but really our goal needs to be to export Thanksgiving. Much better. It is a much better.
You know what?
I agree completely.
No, the US has exported that. They call it Black Friday.
Oh, that's true.
But no, I want everyone to get the Thursday off where you just eat a lot of food and just hang out with your family and watch football. Like, that's a holiday everyone in the family can enjoy.
I think, you know, we were talking a lot about marketing before we were recording, so I want to maybe I'm going to this is something free we don't normally give from the Software Defined Talk marketing consultancy, fractional marketing VP, which is, let's think about, everyone loves Christmas in the Western world, and even in the non-Western world, you know, there's variations of it. Everyone loves, at the end of the year, there's some sort of like holiday time where gifts are given, right? And, you know, I think that what we have evolved Thanksgiving to in America is sort of like, you two are going to have to help me out with this, but I feel like it's like the summer camps, the practice for Christmas, right? Like, it's smaller than Christmas. There's no gifts giving, but basically there's 3 things that are very important. 1, you eat a lot, right? So it's a feasting sort of situation. And 2, your family gets together. So you sort of like, you know, family is good, bad, whatever, but it's this group of people that it's very hard to not be around unless you are a total asshole and you just desert them. And so, like, you've got to learn to live with them. So it's this sort of like social skill you're building up. But before you spend 1.5 to 2 weeks with them, wouldn't you like to have some practice time?
Yeah.
You know, just a little bit of practice. Now, 3, and I think this is maybe where my European friends could kind of get hip to this is what Americans don't tell you, is fuck all happens during the week of Thanksgiving. It doesn't matter if you've officially taken off vacation or not. That whole week, basically, you have off. And we have figured out, as workaholic Americans, we just kind of, no one talks about this, right? So what I'm basically saying is, if Europe and other parts of the world were to import Thanksgiving, it's another week that you don't have to work, which I think we can all agree on.
But the US has given up the week after Christmas. There's a lot of people still going into the office then. You know, my Australian coworkers were like, so December 20th to January 20th, that's a holiday, right? And they're like, no. The Americans are going to be working that week after Christmas. and you know the rest of them are going to be on that. Like,
well, I think
Well,
I think the proposal then is like, we will offer up Thanksgiving. Everyone adopts that. Then in exchange,
oh yes.
we will take on the I guess the week after Christmas we're taking off as well. I think I think on behalf of
both.
United States workers,
Yes.
I can represent us on that subject. So
Yeah, Wisdom of Solomon right there.
Also, I'd like to point out that you work at a high growth company, Matt Ray. So your situation may not apply. Now, speaking of high growth companies, the DORA report came out recently, and I forget. I think they've been out since 2018, 2017. This is before the fork, so it's been around for quite some time. And I don't know. I was kind of being a bit of a snarky jerk, and I made a chart of how many pages there are. I mentioned this last week. Very detailed. However, I think now we've had some more time to read into it. I saw that the DX people, great newsletter, Laura over there made a write up of it, and there's a lot going on in there. But I think there's two parts that we should focus in on, which is the AI findings that they had, whatever, generative AI, and also the platform engineering things that they had. Now, interestingly enough, as preparation for this show, I think Brandon used AI to summarize the AI. Either that, you tell me, Brandon, or you've adopted a style that is very close to AI output.
I did. I did do a little. I was looking for like the key summaries, and like a bunch of people wrote things up. But like I think starting with the AI one, the thing that's most interesting to me was this idea that like kind of what they call it, the paradoxical effect of AI. So basically the survey shows that like, yes, AI does make you more productive, but it makes you more productive at like the parts of your job that you like the most, if you will, that give you job satisfaction. So I think it mean that like you're working, like you're writing some business logic and writing some like interesting code, something that like really challenges you, or like something along those lines. And you're using AI to like do that faster, better, check it. And I've actually, this sort of like, if you will, validates some of the things I've done. Like it's fun, like when you're working on like even me working on very small projects, like getting all the Python to do the thing that I wanted to do and getting it to run. And it's like that's the like interesting work that I
challenge
a lot of us like enjoy doing.
Yeah.
Then it leaves, so it makes that work shorter, but then it leaves, if you will, kind of your world,
the debugging,
the toil, like setting up the environment, getting it all to work, checking in the source code, all of that kind of stuff. So they kind of call it, I guess, the vacuum hypothesis, where it's sort of like the idea is like it sort of takes the vacuum is created when you sort of like, oh, the fun work is done faster and it leaves more time to do like the boring work. And that could be like anything. It could be like meetings, documentation, whatever, like, configuration management. And so I think, Matt, you once mentioned this, and I thought of like your comment when I was reading this was like in Star Trek, like the background characters are always like painting, right?
Or playing board games, or
because that's like the fun things humans do, and like they're not doing the boring thing. And like I had this opposite effect. It's almost like in the Star Trek world, it's like, oh well, like the computers are playing the games, and everyone's like has to pick up the trash or something, and it's
right.
Only the boring part is left. So I don't know if that's where that leaves us.
Yeah, the computers get to boldly go where no man has gone before, and we're left with the toil.
Exactly. I don't know. So, Cote, what was your take? Well, is that
well? First of all, you're kind of blowing my mind here. There are no janitors in Star Trek, and there's also no robots like in Star Wars that are wandering around. Like
they just use that teleporter to like clean the place.
Yes.
So things are just teleporting all the time. Just trash and the turbo lock.
Who is picking up the trash? I mean, maybe we could go watch Voyager and look in Nealon's kitchen and see who's washing the dishes. That might be the only Star Trek sort of like canon thing where there's like some sort of cleanup happening. But yes, I mean that is like a very counterintuitive, what you wouldn't expect conclusion, because what we want, and maybe this is I'm no bias expert, but there's some bias of like progress is what I don't want to do. And so maybe our conception of AI is like, it will do all this tedious work that I find no enjoyment in. Whereas really like, we're going to be left, picking up the trash, which is interesting, I guess. I mean, I think the other, like, so kind of getting to the other parts of the DORA survey, like reading through the AI stuff and the platform engineering stuff, I think maybe we should like wait till next year to see if these findings like match up, right? Like my thinking is like the first year in a survey, when you do something new, it's good to have another year to balance it against, because that I don't know, that finding about AI is so devilish and clever that I really want to believe it. But if you look at the platform engineering stuff, the engineering stuff is confusing in the sense.
Before you leave that one, like, what
Right,
did you
right.
think about the part on, because the other part of the AI that jumped out was this idea that you could, if you will, write more code faster that's still high quality, but it
Yeah, yeah.
increases like the batch, and I don't know, maybe this is related to the platform engineering, but they were basically indicating in there, it's like, yes, you can, the individual are more productive. Like, you can write
Right,
bigger
right.
batches of code, but then like when you try to take that and, if you will, merge it in and like run it in the system, it's actually slowing you down, right? Because it's sort of like,
20 pounds of trash in a 10-pound sack.
right, like you just like, your batch size is just too big, even though like you, the individual, like in your sprint planning or whatever, like you're happy because your sprint points are higher or whatever, like your throughput is higher, I'm getting more done, at least on a thing. But then I look at the whole system, I'm like, oh, actually this isn't working, because everyone's getting stuff more done, and then trying to get all this merged, like now we're actually slowing down, which again is kind of back to like, it kind of, to me, it is kind of linked. It's like, oh, the quote fun part, the job satisfaction part, we're all doing that faster, and we're just creating more of this integration work that just slows us down. And actually, there's so much of it we've created, it's actually slowing the whole project down from our original velocity, which is kind of weird.
Is it slowing it down as a whole, or like all this extra work is happening and we're getting marginal improvements? Is it actually a negative, or is it?
Well, in the survey, they're basically saying like your team's productivity, right, actually goes down. Like, I mean, again, I'm just relying, I mean, to your point, Cote, it's like, one, there's always the risk that we just overread the survey, right? It's just like, survey is a survey, right? It's only so much there, but and it will be trendable next year, but it's still kind of interesting, right? It's just like, oh, the overall group productivity is slower when the productivity of every individual is better.
I think it's good that you brought us back to this, because you are, and this is something that I think the DORA is good at, is looking at the system, not just like individual nodes in the system or whatever the fuck the terminology is. And so the finding that you were just going over, or whatever, the thinking you were going over would be, I mean, there's a word for it, which is local optimization, right?
Right.
And so it probably is the case that for the first couple, if not more years of AI optimization, you'll be locally optimizing the system. But what you're not doing is optimizing when you like throw that shit over the wall, right? And so like, for, as an example, what you just said is like, if let's use another example. If the operations people become very quick and efficient at deploying applications and configuring them and blah, 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 whatever, that's great. But if on either side of them, they have two things on each side of them, whoever is like running production, they have the developers writing the code. So if the developers take 12 months to write code, but the operations people could deploy it in a day, it doesn't matter, right? Like you've just like got a Ferrari that's sitting there waiting to like go buy milk at the store. No one could decide
Kubernetes
what kind of
for your
milk they want.
WordPress.
Just a lot of idling. Yes.
Right. And then on the other side, though, which I think is maybe not often forgotten, but it's important to think about, is if your customers don't care, that also doesn't matter, right? So if you think about this entire system, if you're only locally optimizing with AI, then you're just going to kind of like speed up the thing. And I get confused about the fat Boy Scouts and the belt and the chain and all that gold rat shit. But at some point, you've got to like make sure you focus on like all parts of the chain are fixed up. So I could totally see that, like with the way that AI is right now, the way that any new technology thing is, you're going to be kind of passing on this like efficiency. It's not debt, I don't know what it is, but you're going to be passing on this efficiency thing to the next stage, and you're going to lose kind of like the net gain that you would get because you're not globally optimizing.
Yeah. So I mean, I think, and maybe where you're going there is sort of like, I guess there's two ways to look at it. Is like, does AI stay kind of like around this local optimization, or is it just hasn't been adopted, if you will, into like further parts of the chain, right? Because I was thinking about this idea as like AI, like as we know it today, is sort of like it's best as like a single player game in the sense of like it is very good if like you're writing text and then you're having it edit text or create text, and it's just like you and the AI just back and forth, right? Same thing. You write code, you check the code, you write code. And where it doesn't work well, sort of like the Mark Benioff, right? Like vision of like all these autonomous agents like working together, like on very disparate systems. And like, for example, there's an agent that like writes the code, and then an agent that checks the code, and then an agent that merges it, and an agent that builds it, right? And it's like that like vision just doesn't exist today. Like maybe, I don't know, this is the whole like maybe agents will eventually work, but like it doesn't really exist. So that's where it's like, oh, all these interconnections are still kind of the bottlenecks. And until such time that these agents, like there is a world of where like agents can do all of this autonomously, like you can only really, it's like, I guess local optimization will always be more popular. Right. Well, and this is where I'm like, I don't want to be pessimistic, but I'm also like the lived experience of like, oh, like if I just introduce one other system or person to this group, we're going to be a lot slower. Like I was a lot faster when I was just working myself.
How about this? Like humans find it hard enough to collaborate, and for AI, it's going to be impossible, right? Like the kind of like collaboration across all the things, like is really hard for anyone to do, let alone like at least the current state of things. Like I can't imagine. I mean, I know there's like chain of reasoning and all that stuff, but like, how would you get AI things to collaborate with each other? Like if you have one item or one entity trying to solve something, sure. But like if you have to involve 5 different things, that's going to be really weird and difficult.
Well, I think that's actually how some of the like chess and game solving algorithms work, is they'll have teams of algorithms game planning out different scenarios to find the optimization. So you could have layers of agents that are like, we need to write a program that the inputs are this and the outputs are that. And it's not going to be one agent does one part and hands it to the next one. It'll be like a layer is doing one thing, handing off potential options to the next layer up. And then that layer is running different threads of potential solutions. And eventually they're going to come back and agree on, we think this is the best thing. And that's actually similar to like how neural nets are working. That's how that underpins a lot of this. So I don't think it's not a foreign concept in AI to have agents talking to agents, but don't think of it as one-to-one. Think of it as many-to-many coming up with hopefully optimal solutions.
Now maybe go ahead.
I was gonna say, just man, I feel like you're throwing out like what would be like a very interesting one, but like kind of a radical different way to develop software. It'd almost be like, build me a system.
Genetic algorithms, right? It's already there, right?
Right, but I guess you could almost say, build me an application that like accepts user information and prints it out in this form, right? And you could just be like, and then I think you're right. You could have like, okay, like a bunch of different approaches, like they're just like out there doing it versus like today, I think we think of it, or at least I was thinking of it more like, oh, well, like you could help a human being like write the code, and then you could kind of like help a human being then like merge the code, deploy it, right? It's almost like a different, like you're giving AI like, no, like it's completely black box. Just you go. Like,
but I think the black box is what people want. And I think the step we're at right now is like, okay, this is going to take 30 steps and I'm going to have a different AI helper at each step. And that's probably that's too much local optimization. Is the problem.
Interesting. I like that.
Now maybe this is a little too like philosophical and Philip K. Dickish, but maybe like basically, I think you've maybe identified something about the state of AI at the moment that makes the D&D playing difficult, and maybe this whole thing we're talking about is because of, do they call it safety? Because of the morality that's injected into AI, there's no subterfuge and immoral behavior that you would see in normal human interactions, right? Like there's not like turf protecting and kind of like, like in the discussion of AI, you kind of have this like, the goal is to reach the rational state of things, right? Like, so if you were to ask, for example, an AI, like what company should I acquire? It would probably lay out a very rational case for it, but it wouldn't take into account that like that SVP over there doesn't like the person that you're acquiring, right? And that therefore that would cause all sorts of problems with integration and synergies and all of that sort of thing. So maybe there's some sort of like, you've got to remove some of the safety measures to really get to the point where like you can manage the system as a whole, because all of this system managing is based on like not just the truth of the matter or like what would be evident from the rational case of things. Which, just as a small aside, Apple Intelligence is available now. And
is it available in Europe?
It is, amazingly, or at least I don't know. Some of it is. I've used
tools,
it.
right? The writing tools, I'm sure.
Yes, the writing tools, which is let me have an aside to the aside. The interface for using the AI stuff on the Apple is the worst part of Apple, where like in order to summarize something, you've got to highlight it and then swipe over to go to this thing called writing tools to do an activity that has nothing to do with writing, which is summarizing, but whatever. But I did try to summarize a write-up about the U.S. elections, and Apple AI was like, "No, I'm not going to do it."
The only way to win is not to play.
Yes, I think that that's the current state of Apple Intelligence right there. Not interested in real-world things. Anyhow, well, I do want to get to the DORA part about platform engineering, mostly to get y'all's take on it. Because when I read it, and I actually, last time I had some questions about the DORA world, I was told by DORA people that I should join the DORA community. And what they meant by that, in all the best possible ways, is there's a Google group that's a newsletter thing. Now, I'm not sure about the norms of sharing threads in the DORA newsletter thing, so I haven't shared it because I think you have to become a member to see the stuff. But I asked them, how should I interpret the platform stuff? It's a great thread. They quoted someone on the news stack about it, so maybe you're allowed to quote it. But you should join the DORA community, the newsletter thing. Go read stuff. There's lots of interesting stuff there. But anyhow, reading through it, and I want you two to tell me if I'm like not thinking about this correctly. In summary, the gains from doing platform engineering was basically a 6 to 10% productivity gain, and that's it. That's what their finding was. And there's even kind of like the AI stuff. There's some kind of slowdown there. And also there was like some note that like, I don't know, over 80% of people had platforms, which I don't know, could be, could not be, who knows? Like, I would almost want to take that figure and look at the TAM that people are putting in their pitch decks for internal developer portals. And 80+% would suggest that it's saturated and there's not much of a market there. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there on either side. But, I'm not sure if like a 6 to 10% gain is that good? Like,
well, I was going to go further, Cote, because I mean, the thing I kind of extracted from it was something along the lines of individual productivity up 8%, team productivity up 10%. This is like if you sort of adopt platform engineering. Yet kind of the same thing that happened with AI, yet it can lead to a decrease in throughput and stability, right? So it was like the individual and the team are getting a little bit better at, I read it sort of like a little bit faster and a little bit better at writing code and getting that kind of in, but they're also simultaneously making the platform a little less stable, and therefore the throughput goes down a little bit. So it's like, I guess it's, it's kind of a paradox like there. It's like you would think these would move in tandem, but the software, I guess the data seems to indicate otherwise. I don't know. Am I reading that wrong?
I mean, I think that's the read of it is it is odd. And so that's why I was thinking about this in terms of like investments. Like if I got a 6 to 10% return annually on my investments, that would be fantastic. And so maybe if this productivity improvement compounds, like it's that much more you get every year, then that's great. But it does seem like, I mean, I don't know if have I written this. I have used figures for marketing where you get like huge triple digit returns on doing platform engineering as far as productivity.
Yeah.
And so like this like 1 to 10% thing seems small.
Well, I don't know. Maybe if you kind of broaden it out with a really large company. So like I think you could say something like this. If you were just like one team working on like one application, let's just call it one thing, right?
Mm.
In that case, you would say, in essence, like you wouldn't invest in platform engineering. You would just do everything custom for that one application, one team, and nothing be reusable, right? And that would probably make that group the absolute most effective it could be, right? But then as soon as like you're like a CEO or CIO and you introduce like 3 more applications, right? Then it's like, well, wait a minute. If I let every team do its own thing, now I'm starting to be, now the whole company is starting to be redundant, either creating redundant things and spending redundant money, right? And then I may be like, well, actually, I want you to all use this platform. And each group will be a little bit slower, but the combination of all 3 would be a little bit faster and more cost effective. But you would only see that at the highest level of the company. You, the developer who's probably working on the one application, would probably be frustrated to be like, I don't know why I have to do this stupid step. There's this one step in here that we don't need to do. It's a waste of time. But that step is actually needed by 3 other teams, you know?
Okay, I like that. So now let me ask you this, Matt Ray Dialio. Like I think what I'm hearing here is that if you have a portfolio of 500 investments and each of them returns 6 to 10%,
you're ecstatic.
That's huge, right? And so maybe that is the way of thinking about what seems like a small return on a, again, locally optimized level. But if you do that across all of your teams, that's massive.
Yeah, and so the downside is if you're like a hedge fund manager and you've got 5 companies and you've got one that does 30%, one that's slowed down 20%, and it all kind of evens out to plus 5%. You're like, we put in all this effort to this small set of companies, and over my 4-year stint as a CTO, I didn't get a 30% return on my investment. Right. You're out the door. Because the CTOs have to show, oh, I had this, I had these bold initiatives and we had big results. It's like, well, you had good results, but it's harder to show that with.
But I mean, I think tying back to our earlier conversation, it would just be sort of like, the opposite of what we're talking about. It's sort of global optimization versus local optimization. You're always going to have a group. I mean, to use your example, Matt, it's like there will always be some portfolio managers like, I don't know why I'm carrying the weight. I'm outperforming 30%, right? I'm doing all the work. Or like some team is like, I don't know why we're wasting all this time. I could be so much faster doing our product if I didn't use this. But and they may be incented and paid on that. So they may be very upset. Like, you are slowing me down. You are preventing me from reaching the goals or financial incentives I have. But at the higher level, just like a portfolio manager is like, no, this is actually better because we have less risk, right? We have a more predictable revenue stream. I can replace people on these projects. It's not like I can move people between projects and not have all of these things. So it's like, so it kind of just comes back to like, it's almost like the view, like who are you viewing it from? And that's probably where the friction around so much of this kind of comes in, right? It's like, if I don't benefit in some direct way from, like, if you will, the global optimization, then I'm always going to want to like focus on what I do.
Yeah. Right. So it's almost like the, is this true mathematically? The bigger the principle, the more money a smaller improvement makes, basically. Yeah. So like if you have a larger group, even if it seems like a small percentage increase in productivity or interest or whatever, it's actually massive. And so
absolutely. Would you rather be Amazon growing at 10% or Google growing at 20%, right? It's like you'd rather be Amazon because they're 5 times the size.
Right. I'd have to go check the.
I mean, the math might be off a little bit, but the point is, like
Amazon's other examples, right? Would you rather be IBM or would you rather be Google? That'd be a bigger discrepancy between the two market caps there. But yes,
but they're both growing, and one looks like it's growing faster, but one has just such a larger pie.
I mean,
it's got a pie factory.
Maybe said a different way, a more mathematical way. Like, are you looking at absolute returns or relative returns? You know what I mean? Like, what are you optimizing for? Absolute returns is like, I don't care. Like, I want more capital. I'm going to return in real dollars. I'm going to return more money. Great. I'm glad that you have $1 million project and you're up 100%. I don't care. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't quote move the business, right? So
Well. So here's the last thing I want to throw out as advice for people who read the DORA report. Now, I should go scan. I've mentioned this several times, places that I say this, so I should actually do it. But I don't think they actually have in the 100+ pages in the PDF. They don't show the model of practices that they've done over the years. Like, do these things over here on the left, and that leads to these results on the right. However, if you go to the DORA.dev site, I think you can look at the model, and if you click on this box that says detail, it basically shows you all of the behaviors, the things that people do. That are kind of like for DORA, the definition of DevOps, and they lead to the good results. So if you read through the report and you're kind of like, that sounds awesome, but what do I actually do? They have it on that website, just not in the PDF.
It sounds like an appendix PDF waiting to happen, right?
Yeah,
and I think that is perhaps the most valuable chart in practicality for people who are interested in DevOps. That if you're doing the DevOps and it's not working out for you, don't read that PDF. Go to, I think it's DORA.dev.
Put it in the show notes.
Find the model and the practices thing, and then set up a meeting.
Study it, learn it.
And just put that click on that box so you get the full detail, and put it up on the wall and be like, hey, everybody, are we doing these? And if you're not doing them, figure it out. And that's probably
it's a maturity model, right?
I like it.
Yeah. I mean, it's not even, yes, it is a maturity model.
Well, you look at it and you're like, we're immature. We should be like that.
That's right. I'm only hesitating because it doesn't have a timeline on it like a maturity model is. It's just like the end state. If you are doing these things, you are doing the DevOps, and so you can kind of go through there and do things. Now, speaking of maturity models, I don't think we're ever going to escape talking about open source. But they're one. We've got a lot of WordPress stuff going on just continuously. I was recording one of the software defined interviews with Rachel from Red Monk. And of course, Whitney was there. And, this sort of obliquely came up, and I was almost in my head. I was like, I don't know what to say about this. Right. But, that's the thing. However, I think maybe it is, there's also the, I haven't actually followed this, so maybe this will be a learning moment for me. But there was the Linkerd stuff that came up, which Rachel and Whitney were on top of. So I just kind of listened and pretended like I knew what was happening. But let's check in on what maybe we should enshrine this. Maybe this is not the best word, but we should maybe have a segment every third week for software defined talk called "Is Open Source Fucked?" and just kind of figure out the status of things. So Brandon, you're usually good at knowing what's actually happening. What's the current state of the open source as a business world?
Well, I kind of tied together these three things that I thought were kind of interesting because the WordPress drama, there's a long interview I watched on YouTube about that. Elasticsearch, there's a long interview with Shay Bannon, I believe his name, on the changelog, talking about his motivations, right? And then there's Linkerd and their big post about saying that they basically are profitable after sort of stopping with doing the open source, if you will, packaging part. And it really got me thinking, I guess, watching all of these in a week and kind of if you will, kind of consuming them. It really got to this, I guess, this idea that I'm kind of playing with in my head is sort of well, if any open source project creates, is successful and starts to create, if you will, real value, it's going to create resentment. Because that's the thing that came out of each one of these interviews, right? And they're kind of different ways, right? There's sort of Mullenweg, who's just makes everything extremely personal. He kept saying on the interview, "This is my life's work. I can't believe," kind of just very emotional very frustrated, kind of like, this is my life's work. These PE people are coming in here and they're ruining it. I had to get involved. I had to do this, right? And this is only, obviously, this is like 20 years into WordPress. And, there's sort of like, ultimately, it's going to come down to whether he or, Automatic ultimately own this trademark. That's really what it's going to come down to, I think, ultimately, about what they're going to have to pay. But this is only happening, right? Because I think, it's so successful now, and he sees people making money off it, that it really, frustrates him. And you can watch the interview for yourself, because you can really see how emotional he is. And then if you read through some of the legal documents, some of the things he did, I think maybe they're not illegal, but they certainly are very questionable tactics about how you would go about business. And then you listen to Shay talk about his experience with Elasticsearch, and it's kind of the same thing in a much more measured tone. Though he's sort of like, the company was doing really well, but then suddenly Amazon started doing this, and everyone was confused. Everyone was confused about it, and he kind of kept going back to like, there was so much confusion in the market, we had to change the license. And I'm like, like, to me, it's like, no, you're missing the point, right? The point is, like, you launched an open source project, and both in case of WordPress and Elasticsearch, sort of like, you sort of gave these names and implied that they were sort of like widely used, and like your projects benefited from that, right? And only once they got really, really successful did you start to, and they each created like some resentment. You could just kind of see it in different ways. It's like, and so that's what led to, in this case, most of the time, either changing the license, or, if you will, kind of invoking this trademark lawsuit. And, it just kind of got me thinking that it's like, with any type of success in open source, like, it does lead to this resentment. And then it leads to the people basically making, questionable changes to the licensing or questionable use of their trademarks out of frustration. And I just think it's sort of like, what I'd like to tell all these founders is like, I kind of look at it like, this is what you just signed up for, right? This is what open source is, right? This is what you've done. But now that's successful, you're kind of dragging everyone back into these very like litigated, complicated issues that are kind of taking away from the overall project. And so I think it's inevitable though, right? I think it's sort of like, it's just people, right? Like, if there's going to be massive success around an open source project and there's money involved, you're going to have this resentment. So I don't know, Matt, you spent a lot of time with open source. Like, what do you think?
People are always a problem. I think that kind of gets to it. I mean, it's kind of frustrating, because once you've burned that goodwill bridge of open source, it doesn't really come back. And so I think, most people looking at the drama around WordPress right now are like, what are some WordPress alternatives? I mean, because there are options, right? There are alternatives. And so most people are like, they don't want to get involved in that drama. And so they look to alternatives. And, when it comes to like Elasticsearch, it's like, you burned your community. I mean, maybe they'll come back, but maybe you can feel good about it being open source. But
so to that end, that's a great place. I wanted to throw this out there. So in the interview, and you listen to the whole thing, I'll put the link in the show notes. Shay basically says that, like, because now Elasticsearch, as I think we covered on the show, they're like becoming open source again. They're like relicensing some of this.
Yeah.
So he goes on to say, what he says in there, I think is like, and I wish they'd ask the follow-up question. It's like when you listen to a podcast and like you wish you were actually in the room, because he goes on to say, he's like, I'm really excited that we're being open source again, right? Because it's really important to me and I can't wait. And it's great that we're doing this. And the follow-up question I wanted to ask was like what? Why are you excited about it being open source again? Like, what did you actually
What do you think you're going to get out of it?
Well, yeah, or just more, because he's very measured, whereas Mullenweg just kind of like on just way out there, right? But I think Shay was more like, we had to do this. It was confusing. Now it's okay. I want to be open source again. But like, I don't know. But like, what is this? That was the thing I was just so curious about. And if he ever wants to come on the show, maybe explain it. Because it's like, obviously, like, are you missing that other people can't contribute code? But like, why would they continue to do that? Like,
are you missing like customer feedback where they're hands-on with things? I mean, you might get that. You might get that. But
you could. But it's just like, what is it? I mean, but just like kind of like, it's almost like moving beyond the just sort of like open source is great. It's like, tell me why specifically you are doing this and why and in this case, you miss it and you want it back. And I just like, I don't know. I think it feels like a much more like an emotional thing. I think he's sort of just like, I want to be back in, this is me projecting now. It's sort of like, it's sort of like buyer's remorse. Like I don't like to be hated. Like I don't even say hate is wrong. It's like I don't like where I've ended up. Like I don't like my standing in the community, and I would like to get that back. I would like to rejoin the group and the Slacks and the open source stuff, and not be, if you will, called out for doing what is considered, quote, the wrong thing by open source standards. But I don't know. It's I struggle to like understand, like, what do you miss if you've done all this?
Right.
Like you were saying, I don't like my standing in the community or something like that, right? And that is, I'm trying to think back very rapidly as I talk here. Maybe that's something that doesn't come up in this kind of open source drama too much, is thinking about what the community is. Like it's almost, and what I mean by that is, there must be some name for this, but like, community is often like this sort of like thing that a debater gestures to in the open source world. Like, oh, the community. But like, it's a pretty complicated thing to define, right? Because, your competitors could be part of the community. People contributing code are part of the community. You, the kind of like vested business interests, are part of the community. And then there's people who use your code that aren't competitors that are part of the community. And so a lot of the debates are kind of like, this person is a bad community member, but there's not often a lot of discussion about like, well, what even is community? Because I think who you might consider to be a bad actor in an open source community, their perception is, well, community is kind of like a grocery store where everything is free. I just go in there and I get the avocados and I go make guacamole.
Right.
What's the problem?
Yeah,
right.
no,
And whereas other people are like, no,
a
you should
farmer's
pay for
market
those guacamoles.
where you could see the people who grew the avocados, and you could talk to them if you want, or you could just be like, give me my avocados.
Well, there's two other. We should at least mention the other one. The final one I wanted to mention was like Linkerd, because they wrote a nice post that nice is made wrong. They wrote a post basically saying that, like, and just the quick history was, they basically said, hey, we're not going to repackage the open source version anymore. If you want to use, if you want the packaged version that's got all the, the bug fixes and stuff that we do, you've got to use our version, right? You got to use Linkerd. So they basically wrote an article that said, Buoyant. Like, hey, they are now, Buoyant. Thank you, man. So they're basically saying like, hey, things have gone fine since then. They've made this announcement and now they're profitable, and they're not, if you will, they're going to be able to make money and continue to invest in Linkerd, and it's worked out for them. And I was thinking to myself, it's like, of the three options here, it's sort of like you have relicensing as sort of the if you will, the Elasticsearch method, right? It's the nuclear one, right? It's sort of like, it really, and then you have the trademark. That's really the WordPress is going. And I think that's just as bad in the sense of like, WordPress actually turned off a bunch of updates for people and broke stuff. And then you have this one, which I was like, I guess it's okay, because they're not really, if you will, I view it less about like taking something away versus just sort of telling people we can't afford to do this work anymore, right? But if someone else wants to do it, you can still do it. So I don't know, it just left me thinking like, maybe that's okay, even though it frustrates people. And I think a lot of people in Buoyant community would be frustrated by it. It was like, I don't know, that version seemed to me, if you will, okay.
It's the healthiest, like, if they had started this way. If they had come out from the beginning and said, we're going to write this code, we're going to call it Linkerd, we're going to make it completely open source, and if you want a supported build, you come over here and get this Buoyant thing. It's not that different from Red Hat's model, right? The only problem I have with the current setup is it went to the CNCF. It moved into incubation, which means, yeah, it's quality code. People are using it in production. We like this. Then it moved into graduation. Graduation is supposed to be for things that could stand on their own with the loss of a company, with the loss of maintainers. And Linkerd isn't that anymore. Like, it is dominated by Buoyant. It kind of was always dominated by Buoyant, but when they moved into graduation, some of the other maintainers kind of dropped out and left, Buoyant as like the sole maintainer, and which means they get to make this unilateral decision of, we're not going to make Linkerd builds available.
Right.
And that is a failure of the CNCF model, in my opinion, is that they don't have something to like, demote them. I mean, I'm not. I don't. I think if that had been Blant's model from the get go, not a problem at all, right? But the fact that it's in the CNCF, that's what makes it kind of icky. I mean, it's like this is supposed to be something that can stand on its own. Multiple maintainers.
You're hitting the key point. Now, Kevin, watching in the Slack or in the messages, he's saying the same thing, and maybe this is a place we can kind of end it. Is like, everyone goes into the open source. Like, there's this idea that like, oh, this is great. The code's out there. I don't need to worry about lock-in, right? Like, if something happens, it's okay. Thankfully, I don't pay a big license fee to someone and they raise the price. I don't have to worry about that with open source. And it's like, the takeaway I kind of am coming to is like, no, it's just, you're just trading another set of issues. It's like, if there is money around an open source project, you should be as concerned about that as you are concerned about your favorite vendor raising the price by 10 on your product. You have the same amount of risk. And in some cases, even more. Like the WordPress one is the most egregious, where they literally turned off stuff.
Shut the door.
And broke people's sites. People that have really probably no knowledge or like don't even know what's going on. And that's the absolute worst. So it just sort of like, it's, I guess it just comes back to like, buyer beware. And this, maybe the final thought was just sort of like, there's this idea, benevolent dictator for life, right? That's always, but it's like, I don't know. It's like the link between that and becoming sort of like a mad king for cash. It's just very tenuous, right? There's going to be this moment where people are going to be like, they're going to be resentful and they're going to be wholeheartedly believe that they're right and people are stealing from them. And that's what generates these changes. So I don't know. I just think I kind of leave it like thinking, I don't want to like be overly negative by it, but I'm just like, be very careful about with your open source projects going forward.
I talk with my analyst friends a lot about like ways of revitalizing their businesses, not revitalizing, extending the growth and the success of their business.
New monetization opportunities.
And I think there's two things that have fallen out here. Some more free software-defined talk consulting advice here. One, I think this is covered, but maybe it should be covered more. We don't see a lot of magic quadrants for open source projects, right? Magic quadrants are primarily based on things that you can buy. But, you two have gone over a lot of considerations for when you are thinking through using an open source project. And I think there could be a little more formalized thinking about that, right? Now, two, I think the other side of that is I would like to suggest, I'm never quite sure what's going on in Forrester land, but I'll put them up there because, they're in the duopoly, as it were. But I think the Gartner, Forrester, IDC world, and I realize that's 3, not 2, but whatever. I think maybe they should establish some sort of pro bono work where they work with someone like the CNCF to kind of like vet this graduation thing, right? Where like, if, as Matt Ray is saying, part of graduating is that it is highly unlikely that you will be corrupted by the commercial interests of a majority of the contributors to this project. I think that's what the idea is, right? Then like, maybe the analyst should be like, sounds good for free, right? Like it would be something nice that they could give back to the community, which would be delightful to see. And
we
maybe,
I was gonna say we should throw. I mean, I'd love to hear like the listeners and find us in the Slack or post your thoughts. But like, I was trying to think of like successful projects, and the ones I guess would be like Linux, right? Like no one has come. I mean, you see like a million versions of Linux. People call it Linux, Red Hat Linux, SUSE Linux. List goes on, and it's big enough now that I don't know. I mean, I guess it would be interesting. Like, could someone like could Linus just be like, I'm going to trademark Linux? Like what could happen, right? Like how much risk, right?
Linux has been de-risked.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's what you would want. Be like, what's the risk score? Maybe it has the lowest. And then maybe the other one would be like Git, because there's like
languages
GitHub, there's GitLab. And it seems again, but it's owned by the same guy. So it's just like, do we just have one like odd, nice person?
Well, so like throw Java in there, Java in there, and JavaScript. Or JavaScript would be another good like trailing.
You mean ECMAScript?
I don't know. Exactly. Java, like that one's still. I mean, I put that a little bit higher list than other because that's
no. That's what I'm saying is like the quadrant or the wave or whatever. Like Linux is one good touch point, and then Java is another interesting one, and then everything else, right? So like you can like get some relative feel for like the risk slash benefit of each of these open source things, and kind of like, I think it would give a lot of guidance to what do the analyst people say? Decision makers, buyers. Like it would give them sort of a good feel for how to think about using.
Yeah, I mean, I really like it. And I think you could come down to like something like, WordPress is an example. Is like, hey, if one person can wake up and completely fundamentally change this project and like take it down,
right.
highest risk, right? And then maybe work down from there. And it's like, because it would be really good to know, like, okay, wait a minute, if this person has a bad day, we're in serious trouble. Whereas like, I don't know, Linux, it's like, you'd have to have a lot of people have a bad day before something happened there.
And
right?
and then to go on about it historically, like I think, was this a year ago? We talked about Nginx, or however you say it.
Yeah.
I mean, Matt Ray, you would know better, but I think everything's fine. Like that hasn't shit the bed as far as a web server.
I don't remember what the Nginx drama was, but I
think F5 had acquired them, and and the founder was upset because F5 was holding back security patches for their commercial buyers.
He was writing a new version, right? So I don't know. We need to look it up, or someone, and better yet, someone in the Slack, like tell us what's going on.
Tell us whatever happened to Nginx. Is it still a thing?
Versus I think the Apache web server, rock solid as far as like fucking free to use. Right?
Yeah,
like no problem. Like
it's been here for years.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of things that are rock solid, Brandon, how's the bureaucracy going for Software Defined Talk?
It's going well. As always, if you would like a sticker, just send your postal address to stickers@softwaredefinedtalk.com. Happy to send you a sticker anywhere in the world. And Chris from Slack, he's our 5-star listener this week. So he wrote, I believe, a bunch of comments, Cote, about that you and he kind of talked about the DORA report. So appreciate that.
They were amazing. Someone should hire him as an analyst.
I believe we probably pulled some of his ideas into our discussion. So make sure that we recommend Chris, give him credit. And also, he works at T-Mobile. So this is a plug, but I still think it's an idea. Turns out T-Mobile has backup home internet. So if you have maybe you have fiber, you have some wired stuff, and you want a backup, you could have like a 5G backup. So when your home internet goes out, in the case of like Matt Ray, and you have to maybe record for a living, and then you're like, I need to have internet available. You could have it on. You don't need Starlink necessarily, depending on where you are. You could have a little backup home internet. So I just thought it was cool. I had never heard of it. And he pointed it out, and I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. Of course, sadly, it's not available in my area, but I still like the idea. I mean, we're getting to the point like even your house needs to have redundant internet supply. So if you're someone that wants that, I guess if you're in the US, you should probably check it out.
Yep. Now, I didn't realize Chris worked at T-Mobile, and I know T-Mobile is a global corporation. I used to work at Dell and VMware. I mean, I still work there. And you would tell people you worked at Dell, and they'd be like, "Oh, do you know Chris?" And you'd be like, "Yes,
40,000 employees.
I certainly know Chris." So maybe it's like this at T-Mobile, but here in the Netherlands, T-Mobile renamed itself Odido. Odido, which is very confusing for me as being an old person on the internet. I think of Odio, which was, like the pre-Twitter thing. And I'm not sure why they named themselves Odido. I mean, T-Mobile is like, the Deutsche Telekom, like I think rebranded themselves. And I don't think the Dutch care that like T-Mobile is German. So it can't be that. So maybe Chris can help us figure out why in the Netherlands they named themselves Odido, which is, it's what I use. Great internet connection, dumbass fucking name. I don't know what's going on there, but maybe there's something I don't understand. Now, speaking of things that I don't understand, what I do understand are conferences in the tech world. Now, next week, I'm very excited to finally be going to VMware Explore in Barcelona, or Explore, as you say, if you read the correct branding and marketing stuff. It's going to be great. I've got 3 talks that I'm giving, 1 booth talk. Have you 2 ever given booth talks? You got any tips for me?
Make sure you have a good microphone, because it's usually difficult. Like you have to really project, and like it's hard to get everyone quiet in the if you will.
Worst.
Yeah, booth talks. Love
booth talks. Loud. Keep it simple.
I mean, maybe this is a little too much to reveal here, but my feel on booth talks is it helps my OKR, essentially. And so going further, That's going to be next week, November 4th and 7th. All sorts of great stuff going on there. If you want to see the talks that I'm doing and my recommendations, you go to cote.pizza and you can check it all out. Also, I'll be speaking in Romania, Bucharest, the next week at the Go Tech World, November 12th to 13th. Again, I will be at SRE Day Amsterdam the next week, I think November 21st. That's in Amsterdam, though, so I'm not actually going anywhere. It'll be great. And then I haven't figured this out yet, and I know Matt Ray and Brandon haven't either, but one of our favorite conferences, DevOps Days LA and Scale, is going to be March 6th and 9th in 2025, lovely Pasadena. Great place to be. Yep. I was just watching the new version of that Harrison Ford, what's his face, Shrinking show on Apple TV is out. I think that happens in Pasadena, and you can tell. That looks like a fantastic place to live. And also everyone's so nice and comforting. They talk about their feelings. So hopefully that's what's going to happen at Scale. Now, speaking of things that involve talking about your feelings, the way you're reacting to things, the way you're processing stuff, Brandon, what do you have to recommend this episode?
Well, it's a future upcoming broadcast of an American football game. So, of course, everyone should join the sports channel. I'm sure most of you don't listen or don't watch American football, but it's a lot of fun. And if you don't, I thought maybe a way you could get into it is that ESPN is going to televise a live football game on Disney Plus, but they're going to do it in the world of The Simpsons. So what they do is they have like a fully animated version of the game that's being played. And they did this last year with Toy Story, but now they're doing it with the Simpsons world. So you'll be able to see, I assume, Bart, Homer, many of the Simpsons characters either playing football, being on the sidelines, or something like that. So I thought this was a good crossover for probably 3 people. Are you an American football fan? And are you a Simpsons fan? Because I'm sure, if nothing else, at least having heard this recommendation, you'll see like the weird memes that start to pop up. Like, why is like everyone posting these weird football memes with Simpsons? Like, well, that's why it is, because they're going to have an upcoming game. So probably you're not going to watch it all, but I think I'm going to recommend you tune in for like 3 to 5 minutes, maybe like one series. And you can enjoy it.
That's probably about how long it lasts until the animator's hands just break right off.
We'll see. I'll report back on one if anyone actually watches it. Chime in the sports channel. If not, I'll report back on like whether it was good or not.
How about yourself, Matt Ray? Recommendations?
My recommendation this week is if you are a Spotify premium customer, there are a surprisingly large number of good audiobooks in there. I hadn't really thought about it, but a lot of the stuff that I was getting from my Austin library is also on Spotify. So, it's not as comprehensive as Audible, but if you're already paying for Spotify, go check that out because there's a lot of content there.
Yeah. What do you get? Like 10 hours a month or something to listen? There's like some kind of quota.
Is there a quota?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm listening to a 30-hour book. Thanks for telling me.
Well, but I think it's okay as long as you space it out across.
I had no idea.
Okay, well, I know what you tell me at the end. Like,
if they make me stop listening, I'm going to take away my recommendation.
Okay. All right. Well, let me know.
Huh. So wait, can you pay more to get more hours?
I don't know. I'm already paying a lot for Spotify. It's on the list of things to be cut.
Yes, you're cut. Yeah. Well, I have 3 sort of reference recommendations here. One, there was a couple of interesting posts from people who worked at Palantir that I read last week. And one of them was, I would call the sane sort of post. And the other one was sort of like delightfully crazy. And, they were going over kind of like the culture and the way that Palantir works. And I forget which one, but they brought up kind of like, when you get hired at Palantir, here's 4 or 5 books that they recommend you to read. And so, of course, like I looked at them because I have this current interest in like, why are there so many successful tech people who are crazy and weird? Like, what is up with that? And so I think there's one book that I want to recommend that's called Impro, which was written, I think, in 1979, which, again, according to the Substack post, is something that at some point Palantir people would read. It's kind of like this. I've only listened to a little bit, but it's like this write-up of a theater teacher kind of teaching like improv and theater. And so far, it has been like fantastic as far as I don't know if it's real, but understanding how maybe these weird tech people think. Because the first chapter is all about status and how people are trying to, like, in any given conversation, either raise or lower their status in an interaction that you can have, which you can imagine when you're doing enterprise software consulting like Palantir would do, would be a very handy tool to have in your arsenal. So that's it. I'll listen to it more and see how it pans out. But so far, it's been great. Now, a very quick recommendation. I have gone back to using paper and pen as my kind of like desk logbook, and it's delightful. Now, I'm, everyone's wondering, why aren't you using the Apple Pencil with an iPad? I don't know. It's just a little too much to ask, but paper and pencil, it works out well. So, maybe check in on that. And then also I recalled perhaps the best economist cover ever. Back in 2010, you remember the Greek financial crisis that was like driving the EU to go crazy? And they had this cover with Angela Merkel, the German PM there, and a picture of the Acropolis. And all it said was Acropolis now, which I thought was like, that is a human triumph to come up with that. And so if you want to see the actual cover, you can go to softwaredefinedtalk.com/491, scroll all the way down to my recommendations, click on Best the Economist cover ever, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Very well done. I think you should probably look at that once a year if you're in sort of just like the idea world and get inspired by it. Also, you can find a link to our Slack channel where you can see all sorts of discussions like the one that Chris had, which is very nice, going over the DORA report. You can subscribe to the podcast, all sorts of things like that. And, I hope you had a good time listening, and we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
All right. Well done, Kote. It was, I was at the end of that recommendation. So should I read this improv book or like, what is it good?
Well, I haven't read it all. So the parts that I've read, I would recommend you read.
Okay. All right. I'll have to, I was going to say, I feel like every time a company recommends a book, I want it to automatically be cross-referenced. So it's like, has there been an episode If Books Could Kill on that book? Right.
Absolutely.
That should be like the mesh. It's like, wait a minute. Because I read like Who Moved My Cheese a long time ago, and they just did an episode. Like,
good.
This is another one I've read that I've like, because I've read a lot of these books, and so I feel like they should just do the work for you. Be like, oh, wait a minute, they're actually going to destroy this book.
I agree completely, and that's why I kind of snuck in there the idea that, like, even if this isn't true, it's helping me understand these psychotic tech people, right? Because if they think this is true, that explains.
But I think the only book you have to read to understand it is Atlas Shrugged. Not recommending that.
Fair enough.
I would not recommend it. I will never read it again, and I regret reading it once. So, and talk about a Spotify thing. That book with I think 40 hours in an audiobook.
Now I think I probably have mentioned this in the August 10 plus years of our recording, but my first girlfriend, I don't know what it is, but she got some sort of like scholarship, or she applied to a scholarship, I forget, for the Ayn Rand Foundation.
Okay.
Sure. So I feel like one of the many benefits of that relationship in high school was I don't have to read Ayn Rand because she told me all about it. And
like, what does she do? Have you kept up with her? Like, where is she now? And I don't want to like details, but like, is she?
Oh yeah, no. She actually is married to a professor of computer science who does like programming and Greek symbols and shit. I think she's doing great.
But she's gone on to just live like a relatively normal.
Yeah, everything's going fine. That would actually be an interesting conversation to be like, so, what do you think of all that? Like, that'd be interesting to see.
I need you to send me some pointers. Like, I am so fascinated by people that love that book. Like what? Yeah. Like why? I feel like it's so easily debunked. At least in my mind, in the world of Brandon's mind. Like, I debunked like after 60 hours of reading, and I only needed to read like less than 30 minutes. But I was like, so many smart people. I shouldn't say smart. So many very successful people and people who attended very elite colleges, which I was using as a proxy of intelligence, had like either recommended or referenced that book. I was like, there must be magic in here. I've got to get to the end. And I've never been more disappointed. I was like, this is very easily, in my simple mind, everything is debunked in like just a few minutes. So I don't know, Kate, maybe it's, I don't want to take a philosophy class. I want like a really condensed version of someone being like, oh, this is why these people like it, and the part that you don't get. Like, that's what
All
I
right.
need.
Well, I'd love to sit and dogpile on Ayn Rand, but I got to get to
It's
my
real
day.
one.
So,
All right, enjoy
yes.
the whiz.
That is the ultimate critique of Ayn Rand is like, I got shit to do.
There we have it. And on that note, I want to thank Kevin. I have not seen you in the chat before, and it sounds like you're not in the US. So great to have you. And of course, Michael, longtime friend of the show. We may or may not record next week. We may have an interview. Stay tuned as always. It's